Hi Bookish Besties, my name is Brittany. This is Rescues and Reads. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you are new, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And if you're already subscribed, as always, I appreciate your continued support. Thank you for returning to another video. Today we're here to talk about books that surprised me, both in a good way and a bad way. So on my channel, I try to keep things mostly positive, but I thought it would be okay to go ahead and combine a video in which I talk about books that surprised me in both a good and bad way. I have about 10 examples for each, so we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. Because I have so many, I don't plan on going into thorough analysis of all of the books and why they surprised me and their synopses and everything like that. I have talked about these at some point or another all over my channel, so if you've been following me for any length of time, you will probably know my in-depth thoughts on these already. These are just meant to kind of spotlight some of the books that I found surprising in a good way, meaning I went into the books and didn't really have any expectations or had low expectations, or books that I went into with high expectations and they kind of let me down. I attempted to keep this list pretty recently because I would like to see about doing this every single year, but since I didn't do one last year, I allowed myself to also incorporate some reads from 2023. So this list is primarily 2024 with some 2023 thrown in. And so that we can end on a good note, I'm going to start with a list of the books that surprised me in a not great way. Now, these books are not listed in any particular order, so they are not ranked from least favorite to most favorite or anything like that. They are just listed in the order that I thought of them. So the first book that I have on this list of books that surprised me in a not great way is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I've talked about my dislike of this book ad nauseum on this channel, so like I said, I'm not really going to go into it in depth here, but I was expecting a lot more from this book because for all intents and purposes, it should have been a book that was right up my alley. It was very character driven. It featured a lot of harder hitting elements. It was just following this kid throughout a specific portion of his life, and it was a pretty long book, but yet you're only following this kid from like age 9 to like maybe 19 or 20, so you're only following 10 years of his life. So it was very, very detailed and tedious. I didn't feel like a lot happened, and I really didn't like being in the mind of this kid. But this is a very well-loved novel. It's a Pulitzer Prize winner. It just wasn't for me. I ultimately thought that I was going to DNF it, but I pushed through because I was angry that I wanted to DNF it, and I didn't want to know that I had made it halfway through this story and not finished it. So I did end up finishing it, but unfortunately it was not a great reading experience. These next two books I actually kind of want to talk about together because they were both conclusions to series that I have absolutely loved. I read both of these books this year, and unfortunately they fell far below my expectations. The first one is Running Wild by K.A. Tucker, which is the third and I believe final full-length novel in the Simple Wild series. And then we have Life's Too Short by Abby Jimenez, which is the third and final book in the Friend Zone trilogy. So y'all know me and my love of Abby Jimenez. She is one of my favorite contemporary romance authors of all time. Until this year, I thought that she could do no wrong, but I actually read Just for the Summer a few weeks prior to reading Life's Too Short, and I didn't enjoy that one as much as, say, Part of Your World or Yours Truly. So I guess in some ways that book was also a disappointment, but I was absolutely positive I was going to love Life's Too Short based on my experience with The Friend Zone and the Happy Ever After playlist. I absolutely adored both of those books. I gave them 4.5 stars, and I didn't think that this one was going to let me down, but unfortunately it did. I had a lot of technical issues with this story, and you can hear all about them in the Sarah collaboration video that I did a few weeks ago because that was one of the books that she tasked me to read, and unfortunately it just did not live up to my expectations. So overall, that is probably my least favorite Abby Jimenez book to date. And with regard to Running Wild, it honestly felt like a completely different book from the Simple Wild series. I did feel like this was a completely different story. I really didn't care for our main love interest, Marie, in this. And I also honestly had problems with the male love interest. They both did things that didn't necessarily work for me. And again, I have a whole rant review kind of about this story on my Goodreads. I'll try to remember to leave it linked down below in case you are interested. But I just didn't really agree with the relationship and some of the things that happened, and I didn't necessarily root for them either. So unfortunately, this was a dud. Another book that I had higher expectations for that let me down was The Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. Now, I kind of want to preface this by saying that I do not think that this was poorly written in any way, shape, or form, and I don't think that this was egregiously bad. It's just that I went into it expecting to love it, and unfortunately, I just thought that this was very mediocre and uneventful. I was bored for a vast majority of the story. It was 500 pages, and I don't feel like anything happened in those 500 pages. And so because of that, it wasn't really a super enjoyable reading experience. I don't remember almost anything that happened in the story, and I didn't read it too terribly long ago, and I really have no interest in moving on to the second book in the series. So unfortunately, this is one that I thought I was going to love, and I thought that I was going to be invested in Cassie Clare as an adult author, but sadly that was not the case. A huge disappointment for me in 2024 was The Last One by Will Dean. Again, I have talked about this book ad nauseum. I first discovered Will Dean with a Book of the Month release of Firstborn, and that book really took me by surprise. I enjoyed it way more than I thought that I was, and I absolutely absolutely loved both of the twists that happened. And then I read his other novel called The Last Thing to Burn, and I really enjoyed that as well because it was really harrowing. It was about a kidnapped victim and what she was going through at the hands of her captor. But then I read the last one and it almost didn't feel like it was written by the same author. I absolutely could not stand the plotline. I had to suspend my disbelief so much, and I just really didn't like any of the characters. I felt this book suffered from only being told from the perspective of one character when there were multiple other characters involved in the story. I felt like it could have been more well-rounded and more fleshed out if we had had more point of views. I also found the main character pretty annoying because she kept flashing back to this time in her past when her dad was a gambler and he lost all their money and he got them into debt. And she kept trying to relate that to her current experience in the story, and it didn't make any sense to me, and it just took me out of the story. So ultimately, this one just really didn't work for me. I plan on reading Will Dean's newest release called The Chamber, but if it doesn't work for me, if it's like more reminiscent of my experience with the last one, I don't think I'm going to be continuing with Will Dean as an author just because I really disliked the last one. Another really big disappointment was The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I believe that I read this last year when it first came out, and I was so incredibly let down by that story given how much I absolutely love No Exit. No Exit is one of my favorite thrillers of all time, and to then read The Last Word and have it turn out the way that it did, I just was so incredibly disappointed by that story. Again, I have an incredibly lengthy rant review about this story, and it does contain spoilers, so please don't read that review unless you've already read The Last Word or you don't plan on reading The Last Word. There were just so many technical problems that I had with this. I felt a large portion of the story was very predictable. I definitely don't recommend reading the synopsis of the story on the back because I feel like it tells you exactly what happens in the story. I thought there had to be absolutely more to the story than that, and there was, but at the same time there wasn't. And really that's all I want to say about it here. Again, you can read my review if you are interested, or you can go ahead and read the book, but ultimately I just had so many problems in this. I feel like this was a story that Taylor Adams was like, you know what, I'm gonna throw everything possible predictable into the story because in itself that's going to be unpredictable because nobody thinks that I'm going to do the predictable thing. I don't know, I just had quite a lot of issues with the story. It was an incredible letdown for me, unfortunately. I will give Taylor Adams another chance because like I said, I absolutely loved No Exit. I just had these super high expectations and I wasn't expecting this book to be like exactly what the synopsis said, so it just didn't work for me. I was also really disappointed by Stacey Willingham's newest release called Only If You're Lucky. I absolutely adored Stacey Willingham's first two books, and so I went into this one with high expectations, obviously. This one was very different from her other two releases, which all follow older protagonists. They're in their late 20s, early 30s, or something like that. This actually features college students. Like our main character in this story is 1920s, going into her sophomore year. When I read the synopsis of this, I was kind of thinking it was going to be more along the lines of her past novels where you have a present day perspective which is far removed from what happened in the past. So maybe our protagonist would be late 20s, early 30s, but that's not the case. The present perspective was less than a year after the events that they were talking about. You know what I mean? So there really wasn't much removal. I didn't care about any of the characters, and it was just a very different vibe than what I was expecting. And I think this was Stacey Willingham's take on dark academia, and I don't feel like she did it very well at all. I did ultimately like one of the twists at the end, but that was basically it. I remember almost nothing else about it at this point, and I really hope Stacey Willingham's newest release coming out in 2025 redeems her in my eyes, because I thought that she was going to be a new favorite, can do no wrong thriller author, and unfortunately that is no longer the case. And then the last one that I just want to quickly mention is Heartbones by Colleen Hoover. I've mentioned this before, but Colleen Hoover is one of my favorite contemporary fiction authors of all time, so naturally when I go into her books, I'm expecting to have the best time. Unfortunately, Heartbones just wasn't it. Heartbones definitely felt way more juvenile than I was expecting it to. It definitely was more young adult, new adult, but it felt even younger than that. So unfortunately, I think this is probably one of my least favorite Colleen Hoovers of all time, so that's why I wanted to mention it here. All right, now moving on into a list of books that surprised me in a good way. Now, a lot of these are not going to be anything new. If you've been watching my channel throughout this year, you will have heard me talk about a lot of these books. So again, I really don't feel the need to go into too much detail about them because I have talked about them ad nauseum on my channel, but they certainly do belong on this list. So first, let me just quickly reference the two that I've probably talked about the most, and that is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline and Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. Both of these were recommendations that I got from y'all as part of the Read Like My Subscribers project. Neither one of these books were books that I ever planned on picking up, and now both of them are going to be on the top of the year. So spoilers for my favorite books of the year video that is likely to come in January. I am obviously very late to the game when it comes to Ready Player One. I had no intentions of picking it up. I didn't think it was going to be up my alley, but yet I listened to the audiobook and I was just in it. I was invested. I wanted to know what was going to happen. The audiobook was phenomenally narrated by Will Wheaton. He did a wonderful job, and it was just such an incredible reading experience, and I loved it with my whole heart. And then Assistant to the Villain, I wasn't expecting to fall in love with the story or the characters as much as I did. It is a cozy, soft kind of fantasy romance, and I just thought the characters were wonderful, and I just could not be more grateful to have had these two to reading experiences. Another complete and total huge surprise were Binding 13 and Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh. I picked them up as part of the Mission Impossible project that I'm doing on the hunt for my next favorite romance author. And I picked these up because literally everybody and their mother says that they are amazing and that they will completely break your heart. Otherwise, I would have not gone anywhere near them because they are classified as YA. And it was even more of a surprise to me that I immediately went into Keeping 13 and I read nothing but these books for 9 days. They completely had me in a chokehold. Were they entirely too long? Absolutely nobody is going to deny that, but they are truly some of the best younger romances that I have ever read, and I'm so excited to move on. I think the next book in the series, which was so kindly gifted to me by Tara, thank you so much, Tara, I think that could potentially be the very first book that I read at the start of the year. So that just goes to show you how much I loved these books. Another really quick one that I wanted to mention is actually a novella, and that is Exception to the Rule by Christina Lauren. I have mentioned this multiple times, but I have broken up with Christina Lauren. For the most part, I just find their romances very, very mediocre. They are very superficial, surface level. I do not feel like we get a high level of writing or character development or substance in their stories, but I needed to read a book that was centered around a holiday that I don't celebrate, and this one just so happened to center around Valentine's Day. Now, I know Valentine's Day is not technically a holiday, but everybody kind of calls it a holiday, so I went with it. And this is just a short novella. I think it took me maybe an hour to listen to total, and it follows two people who accidentally connect with each other because one of them sends an email thinking that she is his professor. This happens on Valentine's Day, and so every Valentine's Day they make it a tradition to check in with each other. And I just thought it was really well done and really cute. I would have read a full-length novel about these characters. That's how much I was enjoying it. It was just quite a surprise. It was like a kicking, screaming, crying, laughing situation for me, and I was not expecting that, especially coming from Christina Lauren. So I gave that a solid 4 stars. Another one I definitely was not expecting to love as much as I did was Daughter of Mine by Megan Miranda. I thought that I had broken up with Megan Miranda, but I had to read Daughter of Mine for the Book of the Month thriller project that I was doing, and I loved it. It is definitely my favorite book from Megan Miranda to date. The vibes were absolutely immaculate. It was just an overall really solid thriller, and I highly recommend it to everyone, especially to those who might be interested in trying Megan Miranda and don't know where to start, or who, like me, have had a mixed relationship with Megan Miranda. This is certainly one that I recommend because I was not expecting to go in and absolutely have it be one of the best Book of the Month thrillers that I read this year. One of my favorite books of 2023 that came by and swept me off my feet unexpectedly was Starling House by Alex Zaharo, another book that I've talked about so frequently on my channel. This is a really interesting genre mix of magical realism and horror and even a little bit of romance. I loved that romance more than a lot of the other actual romance books that I read. Even though it was like a secondary plot, it just filled my cup, that romance. So I highly recommend Starling House by Alex Zaharo. I also want to quickly mention Stay Awake by Megan Golden. I wasn't surprised that I enjoyed a Megan Golden because I had enjoyed every other book that I had read by her up until the point that I read Stay Awake. But I was surprised by how much I loved this story and how unique I found it. It follows a woman who wakes up in the back of a taxi. She has no idea why she's in the back of a taxi. She's heading to what she thinks is her apartment, but when she gets there, she realizes that some other people are living there. They don't know who she is. She has no idea what's going on. She can't find her cell phone. All she has in her pocket, I believe, is like a bloody knife and things written on her hands like stay awake. And one day when she's watching the news, she sees that there has been a murder committed and like on the windows in blood is written stay awake, and she realizes that she has this knife and she thinks that she committed this murder. You're also following the perspective of the detective who is working the case, and we are getting answers about the main character through this detective's perspective because she is trying to investigate the case, and so thereby she is also investigating our main character. But our main character is still in the dark. She has no idea what is actually happening. And I thought that was a really clever and unique way to go about the story. It dives heavily into fugue states and what happens when trauma can like erase your memory and all of that stuff. And if you have never read a book like this, if you've never read a Megan Golden, I think that this would be a wonderful place to start. I know a lot of people would probably say The Night Swim, and that's an excellent book too, but this one was just phenomenal. Another thriller that I didn't know what to expect going in, but really ended up becoming a favorite is Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. This is a thriller that actually plays with the concept of time travel. It follows our main character who is up late waiting for her son to get home. And when she sees him walking down the street, she is full of relief, but then the unthinkable happens as she watches her lovely son stab a guy she doesn't know. She doesn't know why that guy is there and why her son has stabbed this guy. And when she wakes up the next morning, none of it has ever happened. It is the day before. And then you're going back in time. Sometimes it's just a day, then it turns into weeks and then months and then years. And our main character is realizing that every single day that she goes back to, there's something important that's happening during these days and she really needs to pay attention attention to it. And I thought it was an interesting take on it. I thought it was a really unique thriller overall, and it was a very big surprise to me. All right, and the very last one that I have that surprised me in a good way, it is a big one, y'all. That is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I am not a Brandon Sanderson stan like a lot of people here on the internet are. I had read the first 2 books in the Mistborn series before attempting the Stormlight Archive. I find Brandon Sanderson's books to be a little bit tedious, and so I didn't have the best time with those first 2 books. Were they very well written and absolutely unique and clever? 100%, nobody could deny that, but I wasn't looking forward to reading them or continuing with that series. But for some reason, I was pulled to the Stormlight Archives. I thought that this would be something that I could sink my teeth into, and boy was I correct. This first book is over 1,000 pages. I think every other book in the series is going to be over 1,000 pages too, and I spent about 2 months just completely devouring the story, and I basically studied along with it because Brandon Sanderson is not one to info dump, which is a problem for me because I like the context. And so in order to get the context, I was going through this very wide, expansive wiki that has been created for Brandon Sanderson's world and learning all about the magic system and what is actually happening. And I don't think I would have enjoyed it nearly as much if I didn't have that resource to go to, just because, like I said, I need the context when I'm reading a fantasy. So I did definitely study and make notes while I was reading it, but that just added to the journey and the adventure of reading The Way of Kings. And I definitely plan on continuing in the series. I probably should do that sooner rather than later because I read this book in like May of 2023, and at this point it has been over a year and a half since I read the book, and I'm sure that a lot of details are escaping, but I had a great time reading it, and by the time that it was done, I just kind of wanted to be back in the world with these characters, and that was a big surprise to me. All right, everybody, that is it. Those are all of the books that I have from this year and last year that surprised me in both a good and bad way. If you have read any of these books, please comment below and let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my thoughts and feelings, or let me know some of the books that have surprised you from this year. I would love to know. Or if you've made it to the end of this video and you are not feeling chatty, go ahead and leave me that surprised face emoji in honor of all the surprised books that I've had over the past couple of years. And as always, if you like this video or if you just like me, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up. Throughout the month of December, from the 1st through the 25th, I plan on posting 1 video a day leading up to Christmas. And if you don't want to miss any of the content or chaos, please be sure to hit that subscribe button down below if you have not already. I would love to connect with you in any of those featured videos or on any of my other social media platforms, which you can always find linked down below along with any books featured in the video. Until next time, y'all, bye.